by Hannah Fry. Hannah is a mathematician and a radio and TV presenter, and you're also the author of the book Hello World: How to Be Human in the Age of Machines, which I absolutely loved. And in this conversation, I want to explore with you what it means to be human in this world increasingly driven by data and algorithms, and how we as humans can thrive in this new world. So first of all, we are living in this crazy new world of coronavirus, lockdown, and post-pandemic. How has this all been for you? How are you?
That's very nice of you to ask. Well, actually, I think getting into a rhythm now. I think I have two very young children. So I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so the first part of lockdown was mostly about working out how to hide from them. So, in Jurassic Park, in that scene where they're in the kitchen and they're being hunted down. I think that was definitely the first 3 months of lockdown for me. But now we have a trick where I leave my house and I'm like, bye, everyone, see you later. And I actually leave the house and I hide around the corner. And I
sneak back. Yeah. I love that.
That's, I think, been the main thing. But I'm quite lucky because my husband is a stay-at-home dad, so he has been able to be completely on childcare. So I know that there are lots of other people in who are not quite in that fortunate position, and women especially, who I think are being particularly affected by the situation. So
yeah, so my wife is a teacher and she's gone back to work, so I'm now juggling 3 kids at home, or needing to do schoolwork with my job. So this is an interesting challenge.
There's lots of strange inequalities that this virus, I think, has really exposed. And I think that there's, in terms of the productivity that you're capable of when you are balancing childcare and not, I think is one of the big things that's come out of this.
Oh, completely. And I think it's giving so many people a better work-life balance as well.
That's true. I agree. There's definitely positives to it as well. That's definitely true. I agree.
So anyone listening to us, who is Hannah Fry? So what do you do? You are an assistant professor at UCL.
Associate professor, actually. You've just given me a demotion there.
You're what? Associate.
Associate professor, yeah. It's whatever. We've adopted the American system and it doesn't make any sense. But it's one rung below professor, essentially. I'm one rung below professor.
But you're doing amazing stuff on TV. You're doing an amazing job, actually, presenting science to the masses, I think. So what do you do nowadays? How do you spend your day? How do you divide your day?
Yeah, so I'm split 50-50. So I'm half still a fully fledged academic, still have my academic post, master's students, PhD students, teach classes, all of that, and do lots of research. And then the other half is more outreach stuff. So radio programs. I have my own radio show on Radio 4, and a little slot on Lauren Leven's program on 6 Music, and then TV and writing and all of that kind of thing. So it's the balance between the two that I think is really nice. In terms of the mathematical side of things, so my role is in an associate professor in the mathematics of cities, right, which is this very broad title. And I think if you look back at the projects I've worked on, so I've worked with the police a fair amount, so on burglaries, on rioting, on hate crime at the moment, but have also looked at things like retail centres, at things like, strangely, badger culls, which is, I know that doesn't feel like it really fits in that pattern, and also epidemiological stuff, so the spread of diseases in the past. And when you look at all of those together, it looks like a kind of, I've taken a paintball gun and just splattered a wall. But the thing is that actually, although I like to think of myself as intellectually promiscuous, so I like trying lots of different things, but there are actually themes that unite all of those, which is that every single one of them are all about patterns that change in space and time. So it's all about the geography and the kind of temporal variance of something. But it's all very, very much about data, all very, very much about finding patterns in human behavior, and seeing what you can learn from that.
Very good. It sounds fascinating. There's a wonderful balance, I think, between the research and the outreach.
Yeah.
Let me just have a look. I always try to have a look at who is on our live streams here. So let me pull in a few people. We've got Mehdi from Tunisia. We've got Musbasha from Pakistan. We've got Bernie from the Philippines. We've got Jude from the UK. We've got Rosemary from Kenya. Francis from the Dominican Republic. Taya from Turkey. Benjamin from South Africa. I think on every single live stream I've done, we've had all continents represented. We've got the UAE.
We haven't had Alaska yet, though.
Oh,
sorry, I mean Antarctica. Sorry, I knew it began with an A, and I just said the first thing. Yeah, have you had anyone from Antarctica? That's the real question.
No, I don't think so.
We want the full set.
Yeah, if you are from Antarctica and you're listening, let us know. And
it's only like 10 people, but
yeah, exactly. We've got people from the US, obviously, from Egypt, which is lovely to see. Okay, let's go into some of the content that we wanted to cover today. And we're now living in this world that is increasingly driven by machines and driven by artificial intelligence and algorithms. Have you got any good examples to showcase that our world is now increasingly driven by machines and algorithms?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the world that we are sitting in right now in terms of the pandemic is actually a really good example of that. I think that, you know, pre-2020, I think people that worked in that space of data and mathematical modeling and, you know, algorithmic decision making, I think that, you know, lots of us in the business world really understood that this was a really important thing that had become established as a norm in the last 10 years. But I think that really actually it's only in the last few months that data and mathematical modeling have and decisions that are driven by data is, you know, I mean, it's quite literally front page news across the entire world. And I think that that's a really good example of just how important this stuff has become. But I think as well as, you know, being the way that we are monitoring what's going on and making decisions about what's going on, I think that algorithms have also been presented as a big potential savior for the situation that we find ourselves in the sense that this, you know, the automated app that would detect your, whenever you came in contact with another person, you know, was particularly in the early months, this big thing, this big hope for the future. And I think that actually all of the lessons of the last 10 years are in many ways condensed down into that one story, which was that certainly in Britain and in a few other countries across Europe, a lot of it has been about that tension between innovation and privacy, right? The same story that we have heard over and over again, and about fairness and about justice. And I think all of that is kind of contained in that one single story. But, you know, outside of the world of the pandemic, I think that I think that really there's no aspect of modern life that has not been touched by data and algorithmic decision making. I mean, we all know of the obvious examples, right? We all know, you know, how we access our news, how we access our films, music, you know, how we access new dating partners, everything. I mean, it's all algorithmically generated. But I think that there are some slightly more unusual ones too, which maybe feel a little bit strange and dystopian. So there's one, a couple of examples of people employing shoplifter detection software in supermarkets, where based on CCTV, kind of you have a quite dodgy, if you ask me, machine learning algorithms running in the background that look for suspicious behaviour and alert a shop to the fact that they might potentially be targeted by a thief before it happens, right? So that's, you know, anyway, I have major concerns about that, major concerns about that, not just in the fact that I don't believe that it works very well, but also what you do about that information when you find it, or the one that was particularly prominent in a big report on AI that came out last year was about affect recognition. So you're trying to detect the underlying emotional state of a person, and particularly in Europe, where GDPR has meant that facial recognition is slightly tricky because that involves someone's identity. If you're trying instead to identify someone's underlying emotional state, it's a little bit more of a grey area. So there's been a kind of big push in that direction. But some of the ways it's used are, I would say, not necessarily what you might expect. So, okay, Disney might use it to when they're screening a film to see how well it works on an audience, to test how much people like which bits. And I think that that's actually happening a lot now. In fact, now that everybody is having meetings over Zoom, I've heard of companies who are launching products and new products and are using this kind of software to detect which bits of the product launch the audience are most interested in, to kind of tailor that product launch for the next Zoom call or whatever. But I think that affect recognition can also be used in quite concerning ways. There was one story about using this sort of detection software, so on someone's face, to detect the true pain levels of a patient with a chronic condition. So the idea being that you can decide whether or not they are deserving of pain medication based on their facial muscles rather than what they actually say. I think there's, some positives in there with the whole idea of the technology, and I think there's some more concerning things too.
No, I completely agree. And what we obviously hear about autonomous driving cars, but for me, the notion that machines can now do so many things we previously thought were the domain of humans. So they can now understand what we're writing. They can listen to our voice and understand this very well, but they can also generate their own voices. They can talk back to us, and I think we're getting used to some of those concepts. But like you said, machine vision, understanding their emotions. So machines are becoming really good at emotional intelligence, for example, which is quite disconcerting, I think, on some levels.
Yeah, I think in a way it's almost like there's a really last year I spent a year with DeepMind, creating a podcast with them, and there was just a couple of things that particularly Demis Hassabis, who heads up DeepMind, that he said that I think really sort of rang a bell in my mind, really sort of made me sit up and pay attention about what you've just mentioned. So one of them is that there's something called Moravec's paradox, right? And the idea of this is a very old paradox. And it's the idea that the things that humans find hard, right, like mathematics, spreadsheets, chess, that kind of thing, actually that's the stuff that machines find really easy. You know, we had chess machines for ages, blah, 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 right, doing math calculations for ages. On the flip side, the stuff that humans find really easy, right, like walking or, I don't know, recognizing when someone's happy, or for many of us, or seeing, in fact, being able to like recognize the shape of a book on a shelf, right? That's the stuff that the stuff that the humans find easy is the stuff that the machines find really, really hard. And actually, in the last few years, it's kind of changed a little bit, and actually the stuff that humans can do is the stuff that traditionally humans couldn't, that traditionally machines were not able to do. They've started encroaching on that territory. And the thing that Demis Hassabis said, which I thought was incredibly interesting, was that he doesn't think it's a paradox at all. He doesn't think it's strange that what machines could do, what humans found hard, machines could do, because the way that he thinks of it is that actually the stuff that you needed to start with machines is the things that you had a total and complete understanding of. So like mathematics, for example, you have this complete view of what it is and how it fits together. And you have to have that, a total conscious, if you like, level understanding of how things work and how things fit together before you can ask a machine to do it. And really, all of the things like seeing, which we can do, but we don't know how we do, were impossible to program. And that has quite an exciting message for the future, which is that up until now, we've only been able to ask machines to do things that we are consciously aware of how we do them. And now we're just at the point where machines are beginning to be able to do things that we manage to do subconsciously.
Yeah, which will also worry, I think, lots of people, because they thought, okay, there's the human side of us. We have creativity. We can come up with new ideas. And suddenly you have machines that can be creative as well. I guess we are now reaching many domains where machines outperform humans, and they're not only those traditional areas of math we can use brute force, like for chess. We've seen this with things like AlphaZero, for example, where you take actually the human out of the equation and the machines learn it from scratch. They can beat the human, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and particularly with AlphaZero. So this is it's a DeepMind algorithm that is capable of playing chess. But what is interesting about AlphaZero in particular was that the previous incarnations of it had some level of knowledge about how humans played. It could learn from previous games, and when you take away that human training, if you like, the machine is better. It beats previous incarnations of itself. So you take away the human input and the machine improves, which I think is kind of pretty extraordinary. But I also think that while it's very easy to get excited about what machines are capable of doing now in a way that they weren't able to before, I also think it's important to kind of keep to sort of stay sensible about it. Like, I mean, there are still things that are just I think that machines outperform humans in a very, very narrow way. But I still think that there are some things that humans are just completely dominant on. I think that humans understand context. We understand nuance in a way that actually I think it'd be very, very difficult to train a machine to do, even in the long term, because I think that part of our understanding of the world is about being embedded in these bodies that wander around in the world. And I think that actually that's not something that you can very easily simulate inside a laptop or, a machine that's locked in a room.
No, I completely agree. So what do you see as some of the major shortcomings when you look at AI today and maybe in the future?
Well, okay, so I think understanding context and nuance is a big one. But I also think that in a lot of ways, I think the biggest shortcomings of AI that we've seen so far haven't necessarily been in the algorithms themselves. I think that some of the biggest shortcomings have been in people not thinking carefully enough about what happens at that interface between the human and the machine. So I think that I think basically a lot of the problems with AI come down to the fact that humans are inevitably flawed. We have these like very great flaws. And unless you take those into account, you're kind of asking for trouble. So there are some very obvious examples of this. In particular, so there's one that I talk about in my book, which is a guy, I think, what's his name? He's called Robert Jones, I think. And he goes off on a drive through this little village in the countryside, and the light flicks on his fuel, saying that he's only got 10 miles to go before he needs fuel. But he notices his sat nav sent him on this little shortcut. So he's like, great, brilliant, follows his sat nav, and the sat nav ends up winding him around this like incredibly tall mountain. The road disappears from underneath him. It turns into this dirt track. It's like it's getting really pretty treacherous. And he's like, well, the sat nav's telling me to do it, so I'm, it must be right. Carries on going. Anyway, in the end, he basically crashes through this little gate and leaves with his car hanging off the edge of a cliff. Right, he like basically climbed a mountain in his car and drove off a cliff because the machine told him to do it. And I think that actually, I mean, that's kind of a stupid story. Luckily, he escaped unharmed from that story, and his car less so. But I think that there are more serious versions of that, right? Which is that actually, when it comes to this idea that people placing their blind faith in a machine that's telling them what to do, I think actually that's a mistake that almost all of us are capable of making. And you see this over and over and over again. Like, I think that the algorithms that exist in the judicial system, for instance, I mean, these are very controversial, but these are algorithms which can help a judge decide whether or not someone should be awarded bail based on a defendant's history. So the algorithm will decide whether someone is high risk or low risk, and then the judge using that can decide to adjust whether or not to give them bail, and in some cases to decide how long someone's sentence is. And what you see time and time again is that when the algorithm goes one way, the judge finds it very, very difficult to overrule it. It's exactly the same story as with the sat nav. And I think that actually, there are often times when it comes between a decision between a machine and a human, you should probably just go with the machine, right? But I also think that when it's something as important as potentially robbing someone of their freedom, when it's a process that's so important that you need some form of appeal, I think that actually the machines that we create need to wear their uncertainty a bit more proudly. I think that with the sat-nav example, I think that actually the sat-navs that we have, recent incarnations of sat-navs, where you are offered, rather than just here's the direction, off you go, as sat-navs used to be, but instead here are the 3 options on a map. You get to choose which one you want. I think that just that extra level of allowing a human to be the ultimate arbiter of the decision, the machine wearing its uncertainty slightly more proudly, not saying this is the answer, off you go. I think that including those steps in the way that we design our algorithms actually is an incredibly important one.
Absolutely. And also for humans to understand what those algorithms are based on, so what data they take into account. So some basic literacy, I think data literacy is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So in this new world dominated by AI and data, this is often pitched as humans versus machines. How do you see that?
I think it's the wrong way to think of things. Because I think that with that whole statement of humans versus machines, you imagine that it's just a straight swap. Like you swap out the human and you swap in the machine. But ultimately I kind of think of it as though you've got like a square hole and a round peg, and if you force the machine, the round peg into the square hole, it kind of covers most of the area. Okay, you're doing, you can get a pretty good job, but there's always going to be these holes in the corners, right? These edge cases where things just go really dramatically wrong. And I think that that's where my problem is of thinking of this argument of human versus machine, because I think ultimately when it comes to approaching sort of automation, there are 2 ways you can go about it, right? You can go for a technology-centered approach where you're thinking about, I want to build a machine to do this job. How do I build the machine? And then expect your humans to fit in around it. Or you can go for a human-centric approach, which is where you start off by thinking, what is it in this situation that humans are bad at? And how do we find a machine to fit into that situation? So just to give you an example of something that I think illustrates that difference quite nicely, is in the case of driverless cars, actually. So, okay, when it comes to driving, right, I think that there are a few things that humans are quite bad at. So I think that we are bad at paying attention. We are bad at being totally and completely aware of our surroundings. And we are very bad at performing well under pressure. Like humans generally are quite bad at performing well under pressure. And yet, especially in the early days, or let's say the last few years of driverless car design, some manufacturers decided to set it up where you have the machine driving the car, and then the human is expected to sit in the seat, not doing anything. It's kind of quite boring. And then often after a number of minutes when nothing's happened, if there is a problem, if there is an emergency, the human is expected to step in at the absolute last moment and take over, performing at their absolute best, completely under pressure, just at the moment where it matters the absolute most. And that is just not a situation that's ever going to end well, right? And that is something that we have seen. This is a lesson that's been learned from, autopilot, from the safety design of nuclear power stations. And yet again, we've seen a number of crashes. There's a particularly famous one from an Uber crash in which a pedestrian was killed, which was exactly that situation. You had a human who was bored, not paying attention, being asked to step in at the last moment, and they just weren't capable of the task, really. Whereas I think that there are now, actually, I think the real true future of driverless cars, certainly, on a global level, is just to switch it round. So rather than starting with, I want the technology to do this, instead starting with the things that the human can't do, right? And noticing that all those things that the human can't do, paying attention, being totally aware of our surroundings, performing under pressure, those are precisely the things that the machines are incredibly capable of. So switching the story around and instead having the human driving the car and the machine being the kind of guardian, the machine being the one that steps in an emergency. And, Tesla has its collision avoidance system. Volvo have a very sophisticated, collision avoidance system. And I think that really is a much smarter way to approach really what is ultimately the same technology, but one that doesn't think about humans versus machines and instead thinks about how do we combine these together to make the best possible partnership between the two.
Yeah, otherwise we just end up de-skilling humans to some extent. I do quite a lot of work in the healthcare service, for example. And if you look at the work of radiologists, this is one of my favorite examples, because AIs are now very good at identifying problems from CT scans and from X-rays. And you think, do I really need a radiologist in the future? And or even completely autonomous operations. We can now have performing replacement. What this might mean in the future is that we have no longer any humans that can do these things because they've not trained to do that. So I guess this is the same is true for driving.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that the surgery one is a particularly important example, actually. This piece of hair keeps going in my mouth. It's annoying me. But the surgery one is really important, actually, because even with the advent of keyhole surgery, and where you have robots that are controlled by joysticks, if you train to be a surgeon historically with sort of open chest surgery, your training would be like literally with your hands inside a patient, you know, feeling the organs. It's very like tactile thing, stitching them up, you know, you're in there even when you're training. Whereas now training to be a surgeon essentially involves watching someone play with a joystick on a screen. It's a very different thing. So that has actually been something that's been, you know, pretty problematic in terms of how do you work out how to make sure that people still have those skills. In pilots too, I mean, so after the Air France crash between, I think it was between Sao Paulo and Brazil, a really tragic incident in which autopilot switched off, and the pilot who was in the cockpit, the pilot who was flying the plane, was too inexperienced really to be able to handle the situation, which actually wasn't that serious, just because they didn't have enough flying hours, right, of flying without support. So now the way that it works with pilots is that autopilot has to be turned off a certain number of hours. You know, every year you have to do a certain number of hours flying without it. I think that's it, right? It's like the irony of automation. The better the machines get, the more you de-skill humans, and sometimes in a very important way.
Very true. So in this new world of AI and automation, what do you see the role of humans to be?
I mean, I think we have to be the ultimate, ultimately, we have to be responsible for decisions, right? And I think that you can't take an algorithm to court. So I think these have to be decision support systems rather than human replacement systems, if you like. But I think that, you know, for me, I think that our role in all of this has to be one half of a partnership, really. One half of a partnership. And that means, I think, acknowledging that no machine that we will create will be perfect, acknowledging that we're always going to have these machines with flaws. But I think it's also about embracing our own flaws, really. And I think it's about perhaps stopping, as we have had in recent years, this obsession with chasing perfection in machines or in algorithms or in AI, and instead trying to design our systems so that they're easier to appeal for when they inevitably go wrong. Because I think that really is something that's been missing, is we need more. There's too much focus on the machine is right and that's the answer, and not, okay, how do we overturn it when it inevitably goes wrong?
Yeah, that's my hope as well. But I remember a conversation that I had with Gary Kasparov a few years ago, and at an IBM event, and at that point he was saying actually that as a grand chess champion, he was obviously defeated by a computer, and then he was working on all of this and thought actually the most competitive teams, the most creative chess players are hybrid teams of machines and humans.
Yeah.
And what is interesting is that some of the more recent algorithms like AlphaZero would almost challenge that, which is an interesting thought, I think, about the role of humans in the future.
Yeah, although I mean, okay, so I don't know enough about chess. I'm sure there are lots of people who are watching this who know much more about it than I do. But I think that there is a sort of beauty in chess, as well as just being able to win, right? And I think the thing about centaur chess is the type of chess that you're talking about, these hybrid teams of humans and machines. I think what the real benefit of that is that the machine gets to do the grunt work, right? Because I think that my understanding of high-level chess is that it's a combination of creativity and imagination and of calculation, right? It's that kind of pairing of the two. And I think the thing about the hybrid chess teams is that the calculation is taken care of, which means that you have complete room to play the creative side. And while AlphaZero plays chess in its own sort of creative way, I mean, I still think that there's more to chess than just winning, right? Like there's something kind of very beautiful about it too. A beauty in the sense of how things work and how things unfold rather than necessarily how they look. And I don't know. I think like if you could build a machine that could paint better than any painter in the world, people would still want to paint, wouldn't they?
Yes, no, people would paint, definitely. And I think that there would always be this human desire to express yourself in art, in music, in literacy, and in poetry, whatever it might be. But all of those things machines can do increasingly well today too, which is interesting because we've had the first paintings done by AIs, we've had poetry written by AIs, we've even had novels written by AIs that were nominated for a book prize. So there is, but like you, I hope that people will want this human connection.
The one that was nominated for a book prize, I don't know about it. So you have to. This is a question from me. Was it entered, and did the judges know that it was by an AI in advance? So it was like sent in as though it was written by a human.
It's a bit like the composer story you tell sometimes as well. The experiments in musical intelligence, where someone composed. Basically, in front of an audience, you played music, one composed by an AI, written by David Cope, the other one by a famous classical musician, and the audience couldn't tell the difference.
I mean, that's true. That is true, and like Cope's experiment is very impressive. And in fact I've done that with audiences myself, right? I did something called in Britain we have the Royal Institution. They do these Christmas lectures every year, so it was my turn last year, and we had a full orchestra, and we did exactly that experiment when the audience couldn't tell the difference between the AI and it was Bach, I think, that we played, which was amazing, and it was so impressive. But I think the thing is that it's impressive until you find out how that algorithm works, because essentially it's like predictive text, right? So that's essentially what it's like. So if you just press the middle button on you start off a sentence, you seed a sentence, right? And then you just press the middle button on predictive text to create a sentence. Like it has the structure of a sentence, and it might even sound something like what you would say. But what this algorithm is really doing is it's taking all of Bach's music, and it's like it's passing it through a cheese grater and then sticking it back together. And it's like, well, it kind of looks like cheese, and if you're far enough away, you can't maybe tell the difference. But it doesn't necessarily have quite the same. It's not quite the same experience ultimately in the end.
I was talking to Marcus du Sartoy from Oxford University, and he's written a book on creativity, the creativity code, which I also loved, and he basically argues that actually music is very mathematical, that you can break it down into small components, and even the most successful composers of the past, this is what they did. They broke their music into tiny little parts and then reconstructed them into a new piece.
Yeah, I mean that's completely true, right? It is very mathematical, the structures of it. I think there is truth to that. I don't know, maybe I'm an old romantic, but I think for me, originality isn't the problem, right? You can take your kaleidoscope of notes and just twist it and make something new, and that's not a problem. And creating something that's good, where your metric of good is anything that people have liked before, that's easy too, right? That's not a problem. But I think that if you limit yourself to those two things, if you limit yourself to everything that's gone before, then I think that you really risk missing, the Picassos, or like, I don't know, like the real sort of game changers. You really miss those because the computer can't distinguish between what's original and bad and what's completely original and good, right? And I think that for me, so Hofstadter, the guy who wrote Gödel, Escher, Bach back in the 70s, he has this incredibly beautiful way of describing something that I think really closely aligns with my opinion on this stuff, which is that I wish I had the quote to hand, but essentially it's something along the lines of, unless you have like stood in the rain, unless you've like felt angry, unless you've kind of felt hungry or all of those things, then you can't communicate, what it is to be human with another human. And that ultimately is what art is about. And I think I think ultimately for me, that's where I stand on this stuff. You can make something that sounds pretty, sure, or looks pretty, fine. And maybe you can like trick someone into thinking it's human. But I think like real art, like really stuff that really speaks to you, I think that has to come from a human. But yeah, I'm an old romantic.
And I agree with you on lots of different levels. I think there's real innovation. I also feel that you can create some of this. I was thinking about this, for example, have algorithms that can write or even sing songs. And you can try these out. You can put them out on platforms like Spotify, and you can randomly tweak them and have random versions of it and see how do people react to this. So you could actually create a very innovative way of seeing what people like. And
although that's been tried before with like new regional success. So there was a t-shirt company, they were called Solid Gold. This is about 5 years ago. And they worked out that you could use exactly that approach to find t-shirts that was like a major big seller. So what they did is they, that like, I don't know if you've seen it, there's this really annoying British old poster from the war that says keep calm and carry on, right? And because it was out of copyright, you could turn it into anything you wanted. So they computer generated using a dictionary, like hundreds of thousands of versions of this keep calm and blah, 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 insert words here. And they generated them automatically, and they gave them all an automatic Amazon link, right? So if you just happen to think of a phrase, then there you go, the t-shirt already exists. So that was fine, great idea. You'd only make them when they're ordered, brilliant. You just happen, let the audience decide on the one that's the best. Slight problem is they didn't think very carefully about what dictionary they uploaded. So they ended up essentially selling t-shirts, like genuinely selling t-shirts, saying keep calm and hit her, or keep calm and knife him, right? Like things like that. So yeah, I mean, sure, like randomly generating stuff and letting the audience decide has pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen this from in chatbots that learn of how people actually talk to each other on the internet, and this has all gone wrong. So let's look at a little bit of career advice here. If we're now looking at this new fourth industrial revolution that we're experiencing, where AI and machines are performing increasingly complex tasks, what does this mean for jobs? What will be your recommendations in terms of skills people should be focusing on to be successful? So what are your predictions about future skills and future jobs in this world?
Yeah, I think the jobs that I'm really concerned about are manufacturing jobs, actually. I think that the sort of embodied AI stuff is very sophisticated. I think that the stuff where, historically you needed you needed human hands really to do that very fine grain stuff. I think that is a bit of a concern. I think in terms of working in a more positive way of like what skills should you focus on. So, okay, I may be a bit biased here given that I'm an actual mathematician, but I do sort of think that when there is uncertainty in the marketplace for the future, actually you really can't go far wrong by sticking to the purer subjects, right? So like computer science and statistics particularly, and mathematics and even physics, really, because I think that when you have those technical skills, when you have that sort of training in the more technical skills, actually it's very, very easy then later to pick that up and apply it in different areas, rather than necessarily trying to tailor your skill set to what you imagine the world might be like. Do maths, basically.
I agree. I think data science, math, statistics, computer science, they will become increasingly important. So for me, I break this into two parts almost. I say, on the one hand side, we need the people that can build the machines of the future and program them. And on the other side, we need the really human element too. We need to have people that are the artists of the future. We need artisan bakers that bring the human touch to making bread. So anything that makes us human, I think, will become more valuable in the future. And things like creativity, still emotional intelligence, and skills like critical thinking as well. And all of those, I think, very human skills. So for me, sometimes it's so easy to forget, let's get everyone into coding and math. That we need more in those fields, but we also need the very human element and the humanities.
I totally agree. I think that's actually a really important point. I'm glad you pulled me up on it, because I think that, so in my head, when I was saying purer subjects, I think that I probably was actually thinking about the humanities too, but didn't say it out loud. Because I think, this year, 2020, is a really good example of why the humanities are so important. I mean, I think that I can't speak for other countries, but in Britain, we had every technical expert, we had all of the scientists, all of the statisticians, all of the mathematicians, all of them in a room together, and it still wasn't enough. Like, you needed that science doesn't have a moral compass. It can't tell you which way to go. And I think that that's why, especially when we're talking about reshaping our entire future with, artificial intelligence and data and all of this stuff, I really think that actually that has to come hand in hand. I mean, this is a massive argument that I make in the book, right? But it has to come hand in hand with thinking about humanity as well as the technical side.
Well said. The other area that you like to talk about is the mathematics of love. This is another book that you have written. So what is the relationship between math and love?
Yeah, so this is about how long ago was it? Maybe 6 years ago, and I just finished my PhD, and I was working as a postdoc, and someone asked me to do a talk, and I was just in a bit of a cheeky mood. So I was like, right, I'm going to take the thing that's furthest away from maths of all, and I'm going to smash them together. And I'm just going to prove finally, once and for all, that maths isn't this stupid, pointless thing that no one cares about. It's something that actually has something to say on absolutely everything. Anyway, in the end, I wasn't really expecting it, but it ended up becoming a TED Talk that was one of the most popular of the year. I think it was like in the top 5 talks of that year. And had I known, I probably would have done some things differently. But anyway, so the little book came out of the talk. So after the talk was filmed, they were like, can you write up a few, it's very tiny. It's like a really teeny tiny book. Just write up a few extra things about it. But I mean, I do think that there is interesting stuff in there. Like, I think that while you can't, of course, you can't write down a mathematical equation for that sort of spark of romance, or it's basically the same thing as what we're saying. I think that you can't, that real way that it feels when you fall in love with someone, I don't think that you can touch that really with maths and equations. But on the flip side, that doesn't mean that there aren't various aspects of your romantic life that don't have very clear patterns to them. Those things like how many people you date in your lifetime, right? Or how long you leave it before you decide to settle down. Or even my particular favorite one is about arguments between couples in long-term relationships. So if you're in an argument and you're going back and forth with one another, this person says something, that person says something, and those things can be either positive or negative. You can be antagonistic, you can be defensive, you can stonewall your partner. Actually, that's quite a mathematical thing, right? Like that back and forth, positive, negative. You can look at that through a mathematical lens, through the lens of data from real couples, and to really capture that essence of the ebb and flow of an argument and how it evolves over time.
Fascinating. And I guess it plays a big role in helping us find partners, increasingly so, I guess, with dating apps. And we now have apps like eHarmony that are completely data driven. And you could argue that humans are not particularly good at finding love, given that almost half of all our marriages end up in divorces.
Yeah.
I,
It's true.
I'm hooked on this program at the moment, Love at First Sight, which is basically scientists putting couples together. They've never met each other. They then get married, and then they have to work out if they can actually stay together. And I love this idea, but you also see all the problems with it. So I think it's probably, like you've said before, it would be nice to have some help by algorithms and from algorithms, but maybe not have it completely driven by them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is about those algorithms is that, I mean, if you could find an algorithm, right, that could guarantee that you could meet somebody who you would definitely like and they would definitely like you. I mean, imagine how much money that would be worth, right? Imagine how much money people would be willing to pay for that, to the guaranteed perfect marriage. And I think the thing is that, you know, this idea, searching that relationship science, you know, has been going on for almost 100 years. And I just don't think that anyone's got close. And, you know, even those algorithms that exist on, you know, like OkCupid or eHarmony, they get you a few percentage points. You know, it's just, it's slightly better than complete random, but you could kind of do that yourself anyway.
Yeah.
I think, like, generally, in terms of the numbers, when you look at the data on all of this stuff, I think that the big lesson is that it really is a numbers game, and actually you should aim high and you should aim often, and be prepared to stop at some point. Like, be aware that you can't get through all 7 billion people. I mean, you can try. And some people do, let's be honest.
Some of them are trying, definitely. The way we talk about math here is absolutely fascinating, and I think is widely appealing to anyone. The challenge is that we still haven't got enough of a gender equality in this whole field of STEM, in science, technology, math, and engineering. So as someone that is obviously female, is making a really amazing impact in this field, and you're amazing role models to other girls. If my 14-year-old daughter was watching now, but how would you get her into?
She's not watching. Is she not watching?
She has to do some schoolwork. I promise her to watch that. She needs to watch it afterwards.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I think actually, what do I think? I think lots of things. I think that it's not just gender diversity that's a problem in maths and engineering and the sciences. I think that there's all kinds of diversity issues, and I think that part of that, I think, is a hangover from the past, right? Because I think that I think if you conjure up an image in your mind of what a mathematician looks like, right? I know we're all sharing the same image. I know that we've all got the same image in our mind of exactly what that guy looks like. And I think that the thing is that if you grow up and you don't look like that person, or you don't look like you could become that person, and you say to somebody, "Oh, I really like maths, and like I think I'm going to be a mathematician," then inevitably you're met with surprise, and it's often quite positive. The surprise, like, people are quite nice about it, but you're often met with like, "Wow, you're going to be, that's what you want? Okay, all right, fine, okay." And that's, I think, a different experience to if you grow up as a white boy, right? If you grow up as a white boy and you're like, I'm going to be a mathematician, I think the general reaction, certainly from friends of mine who I've spoken to, the general reaction is like, wow, you must be so clever. Like, that's really amazing. And then I think the problem comes in a bit later on, when things inevitably get hard, right? Because it is a tough subject and things do get difficult. And I think I really see this in my students, in my undergraduates, and especially in my PhD students, when stuff gets really hard, which is that when the going gets really tough, all of the girls and all of the people from different ethnic minorities who have spent their whole life having people be surprised that they're in the subject, when stuff gets hard, they think that they're the problem, right? They're like, this subject is hard because I'm not supposed to be here. Whereas the boys, when stuff gets hard, they're like, it's hard because it's a hard subject. And I know, because I've been told my entire life, that I'm clever and I can get through this. It's hard not because of me. And I think that just that difference between blaming outwards and blaming inwards actually ends up making a huge difference in the long run. And I think because our whole system, universities are hundreds of years old, these subject boundaries are hundreds of years old, more thousands when it comes to mathematics. And I think that we've designed our universities to be a perfect fit for one particular type of person, someone who speaks up and is bullish and is, confident and like performs well under pressure and all of that stuff, right? And I think that now that we are expecting a huge other range of people to come in and just squish themselves into the cracks in that system, and perform just as well as everybody else. And actually, you know what? I want there to be mathematicians who aren't bullish. I want there to be mathematicians who are considered and who take time over their answers. And I want mathematicians who question themselves and as well as love all the subjects. And I think that that's really I don't know necessarily how we do that, and I think it's a tough thing and it's going to take time. But I think that it's no surprise really. You can't just be like, why aren't there more girls doing math, or why aren't there more black women doing math? And it's like, well, I mean, there is years and years and years of reasons as to why we are in this situation.
Yeah, I agree, and the fact that we are in this space causes some real problems. There are lots of algorithms that are written today are written by white men, and they bring it in their own biases into those, and therefore the systems we are creating are not maybe as diverse and as relevant as they should be.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. That does really, yeah. Yes.
I like the idea of actually adding an A to the STEM. I've written an article about this, about adding arts to this as well, to call it STEAM.
Yeah.
I think this might make it more attractive, because then you realize it's not just all technical. Actually, you need some of the artistic, the humanities that we talked about before, some of those topics, and bring this and make it actually more relevant.
What about philosophy though? What about STEAM?
Yeah. Yes.
I think the philosophy side is really important. Then maybe we can find a U, an N, and a K, and then just make it steampunk.
Very good. In this new machine-driven world, what are your hopes and your predictions for the future then? If you were to say, these are some of the things I hope will happen, this is how we will use algorithms in the future, this is where we get the balance right.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope that we get the balance right between privacy and innovation. I think that actually some of the private companies have been doing really good stuff on this recently. I think particularly the big companies have started taking privacy very, very seriously, kind of leading the charge actually over governments, which is surprising. I hope that we manage to do that. I fear that we won't actually. I fear that maybe our traditional idea of privacy is gone. But I think that my big hope really is that actually we're kind of on a knife edge, right? Like we're on a point where an awful lot has changed in the last 20 years, let's say, but particularly in the last 10. And I think we're at a point where it can flip one way or the other. I think that our new technology can flip to increase inequality, or it can kind of drive in a different direction to actually minimize it. And I think I know which way we're headed, but I can't help but hope that we end up getting in the other direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think the technology has the potential to make our world a better place, a more human place. It can eradicate inequalities. If I just think about the access to healthcare and education that AI can help us create, but we need to steer it into the right direction, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's the flip side of that is that, a lot of the biggest problems that we face in our future, the pandemic, climate change, even like, desalination, right, which would make a massive difference to so many countries around the world. I do think that all of those are things that data and algorithms and AI and science more generally, those are problems that those subjects can solve and can really make an impact on. So I guess that maybe that's also my hope really for the future.
Very good. This session is always for the audience. I haven't been as interactive today because I absolutely loved our conversation. So I might have missed a few questions. So if you have any specific questions, put them into the comment function now. Also, let us know what you think about today's session. And if you ever want to re-listen to any of those conversations, you can go to my YouTube channel where you can find them. I've got one question here from Sukarita Panika from Mumbai, and she's talking about that algorithms can help to control human biases, for example, but how do we reduce biases that are inherent in machines? So the example she gives is recommendation engines like Netflix that they are really good when they have lots of data about us. So if we've been watching Netflix every night for a year, they can recommend us very comfortable and very good accuracy of what we might like. But how about when they don't have any information? So if you just join Netflix and they're now proposing some films to you that are particularly popular, her question is, the danger is that this then makes them more popular because they are the first ones that they've been recommended, people watch them, and therefore they might influence what is recommended in the future, and even potentially what films and documentaries and things are being made and commissioned in the future. So any good answer to
that? That's a very good one. Okay, so I think that you're right that when you have no information on a person, the best assumption you can make is that they are completely average, that they are all other people averaged out together. That's the best starting point that you can go that you can go for, which is essentially showing them films that other people like. In terms of that particular example, essentially what's gone wrong there is that you have a feedback loop, right? Which is that, like, on the average people, you have you're using their information and feeding it back into the system. So to break that feedback loop, in that particular example, all you need to do is to exclude people from contributing to the "is this film popular" dataset until you know enough about them, until you are certain that they are, until you're certain which kind of category they're in. So once they've been on the system for a certain amount of time. So I think that is a big way to look for bias, actually, is to look for feedback loops and to break them where necessary. I think that actually applies, really far outside of Netflix, right? So, like, for instance, there's, like some of the CV filtering algorithms, which is completely necessary, right? If you've got like thousands of people applying for a job, you need some way to filter them. But those algorithms that are trained on people who have performed well at a company in the past, and designed to look for people who they will do well at the company. If your company is full of one particular type of person, I mean, like a white guy, for example, then essentially you're training an algorithm to look for a white guy, and then you end up with another feedback loop there, right? So once again, it's about minimizing bias in that system is about looking for the feedback loop where it might exist and breaking it. So yeah, I think that's really a lot of bias occurs because you are using technology as a mirror rather than allowing it to reflect a version of the world that you want to live in, rather than necessarily the world that you do.
Very good. There's another question here that I think is quite good. The name doesn't come up, so I can tell you who has asked this, but do we need an ethical code for AI developers? That's a very good question, I think.
It is a very good question. So I did a Guardian piece about this actually last year, about Hippocratic Oath for AI researchers, because I think that actually this goes to show a little bit about just how much the world has changed and so quickly. Because when I did my training as a mathematician, there was no conversation about ethics whatsoever, nothing in the entire time. And actually, the story that I shared in this Guardian piece was about how I did my PhD about fluid dynamics, right? So you're looking at how fluid particles move around. There's no need to worry about ethics in that situation. But suddenly then, a year later, I was using that same those same equations, the same ideas, to look at how people move around in a space, right? So swap out particles, swap in people. And suddenly you're just in a slightly different situation. And I think in particular for me, I was working with the police and looking at rioting and looking at peaceful protests turning violent. And I just sort of had this like wake up call, actually, while I was on stage a keynote in Berlin. And I'd just been very, flippant about the whole thing and been like, here's the equations, here's how you do it. Isn't it great? And, people in Berlin, I'm endlessly grateful to the people in that audience who were like, what? No, you can't do that. And I think that really was a really important moment for me in my career, because it took that sort of shock, if you like, for me to be like, wow, this is totally true. And I think that actually for me, I was just doing some academic work that never got implemented in the real world. But I think for some people who have that wake up call a lot later, I think there are very famous, internationally known examples of where people really, went very far down a particular road before they had that wake up call that actually ethics are incredibly important. And I don't think that Hippocratic Oath would be a silver bullet. I don't think it fixes everything, but I think that if you talk about ethics as early as possible and keep it as part of the conversation the entire way through, I really think that's a positive step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think we're getting there. I think there are now lots of different code of conducts that are being developed that are very similar, that definitely are going in the right direction.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. There are lots. Yeah.
Very good. I think people enjoyed it. Peter saying very insightful and stimulating. Thank you. People saying thank you. Thank you very much, Nav. Florence saying fascinating conversation. Thanks. So thank you very much. As always, let me know what you think and if there's anything else you want me to discuss in the future. If people wanted to carry on the discussion with you, Hannah, where can they find you?
Twitter is probably the best place. So I am FryR² on Twitter.
Very good.
Hilarious maths joke.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.